There's a moment in every person's life when they realize that everything they thought they were might be a lie. The achievements hanging on their wall, the identity they've built from childhood, the very sense of self they wake up with each morning. All of it suddenly feels as insubstantial as smoke. This isn't a mental breakdown. This isn't failure. According to the ancient Hermeticists, this is the beginning of true transformation. Hermeticism was a philosophical and spiritual tradition that emerged in ancient Egypt and Greece, treating inner development as a precise science with predictable stages and measurable results. These practitioners developed alchemy, not just the attempt to turn lead into gold, but a systematic method for transforming human consciousness itself. They called the first stage calcination, the controlled burning away of everything false until only what's real remains. But here's what modern spirituality gets wrong about this process. It isn't some gentle awakening or blissful ego dissolution. This is deliberate destruction, and it's absolutely necessary if you want to build anything authentic. These Hermetic alchemists weren't just playing with chemicals in their laboratories. They understood something profound about human nature that we've largely forgotten. Before you can create gold, you must first reduce everything to its most basic elements. Before you can become who you're meant to be, you must burn away who you think you are. They mapped this process with scientific precision, and the first stage might be the most important lesson you never learned about personal transformation. Most people live their entire lives defending something that was never real to begin with. Think about it. How much of what you call yourself is actually just a collection of stories, reactions, and identities that you've unconsciously absorbed from your environment? Your political opinions that perfectly mirror your social circle, your career ambitions that seem to appear fully formed in your teenage years, even your deepest fears and desires. How many of these actually came from some authentic core within you? And how many are simply elaborate constructions built from expectations, traumas, and conditioning? The Hermeticists had a term for this constructed self, the false ego, or what some traditions call the lunar personality. This isn't the ego in the psychological sense. It's something more problematic. It's the accumulated mass of identifications, beliefs, and emotional patterns that build up around our true nature, like layers of sediment around a pearl. Over time, these layers become so thick that we forget there's anything beneath them. We mistake the shell for the treasure. Here's what makes calcination so challenging. This false self doesn't go quietly. It has spent decades building elaborate defense mechanisms, creating entire worldviews designed to protect and justify its existence. When the fires of transformation begin, whether through crisis, loss, or simply the natural pressure of authentic spiritual practice, this constructed identity will fight back with everything it has. It will convince you that destroying these patterns means destroying yourself entirely. It will whisper that you're losing your mind, that you're throwing away everything you've worked for, that you're betraying everyone who believed in the version of you that you've presented to the world. This is why most people never make it through calcination. They mistake the death of their false identity for actual death, and they pull back from the fire just when it's beginning to do its most important work. But the Hermetic alchemists understood something crucial. What burns in the fire was never real to begin with. Your essential nature, what they called the divine spark, cannot be destroyed. It can only be revealed. When we examine calcination through the lens of Hermetic alchemy, we're not dealing with vague metaphors about letting go. This is a precise science of transformation with specific stages, predictable challenges, and observable outcomes. The alchemists approached the destruction of the false self with the same methodical attention they brought to their physical experiments, because they recognized that the laws governing inner transformation are just as reliable as those governing chemical reactions. The element associated with calcination is fire, but not the gentle warmth of a candle or the cozy comfort of a fireplace. This is the intense purifying heat of a forge, hot enough to break down molecular structures and reduce complex compounds to their essential components. In psychological terms, this fire shows up as any experience intense enough to crack the rigid patterns of the false self, profound loss, spiritual crisis, the collapse of cherished beliefs, or the sustained pressure of authentic inner work. What's fascinating is how precisely this process mirrors what happens in a laboratory. When you subject a complex chemical compound to intense heat, it doesn't disappear. It breaks down into simpler, more basic elements. The same thing happens with calcination of consciousness. Your sophisticated psychological defenses, your elaborate self-concepts, your carefully constructed worldview, all of this complexity gets reduced to something much simpler and more fundamental. The Hermeticists taught that what survives this fire is what they called the philosophical sulfur, the essential nature of the individual that exists beneath all conditioning and identification. This isn't some mystical abstraction. It's the part of you that observes your thoughts without being captured by them, that experiences emotions without being defined by them, that can witness the rise and fall of identities without mistaking any of them for your true nature. Modern psychology might call this the observing self or pure awareness, but the alchemical terminology captures something clinical language misses. This essence has active, creative power. It's not just awareness. It's the conscious force that can rebuild your entire personality from the ground up. Here's where most modern spiritual approaches completely misunderstand calcination. They try to make the process comfortable, gradual, and safe. They offer techniques for gently releasing old patterns, for loving yourself through transformation, for making the death of the false self as painless as possible. But this fundamentally misses what we're dealing with. If you've spent decades building elaborate psychological defense mechanisms, if your entire sense of identity is wrapped up in stories that no longer serve you, if your emotional reactions are hardwired to patterns that keep you trapped, how exactly do you think gentle affirmations and gradual lifestyle changes are going to address these deep structural problems? It's like trying to demolish a concrete building with a feather duster. The false self has had years or even decades to establish itself in your mind. It has created neural pathways, emotional habits, and behavioral patterns that operate almost automatically. It has woven itself so thoroughly into your sense of identity that trying to separate from it feels like trying to separate from your own skin. This is why calcination requires such intensity. Only experiences powerful enough to overwhelm your usual psychological defenses can reach these deep structures and begin to dissolve them. But here's the crucial point that distinguishes authentic calcination from mere suffering. The fire burns only what needs to burn. Every false belief that gets destroyed creates space for something truer to emerge. Every outdated pattern that dissolves removes an obstacle to your authentic development. What feels like devastating loss is actually surgical removal of everything that was limiting your potential in ways you couldn't see while you were identified with it. When the flames die down and the smoke clears, what actually remains standing? This might be the most crucial question in the entire alchemical process, because what survives calcination becomes the foundation for everything that follows. The first thing you discover is space, a kind of openness that might initially feel disorienting. Where once there was a dense tangle of identifications, beliefs, and emotional reactions, there's now room to breathe. This space isn't emptiness in any negative sense. It's fertile ground, ready to receive whatever you consciously choose to plant there. But more important than the space is what occupies the center of that space: pure awareness itself. Stripped of all its false identifications, consciousness reveals its essential nature as the unchanging witness that observes the coming and going of all psychological content. This isn't the ego observing its thoughts. The ego was what got burned away. This is something more fundamental: your basic capacity for conscious experience itself, revealed now in its natural simplicity. What's remarkable is how stable this ground of awareness turns out to be. All those years you spent defending and maintaining your psychological identity, trying to protect it from threat and change. And it turns out that what you were trying to protect was ultimately just a collection of temporary patterns. Meanwhile, the thing you probably never even noticed, your basic capacity to be conscious, proves to be completely unshakable. This recognition changes everything. When you know from direct experience that your essential nature cannot be damaged by the loss of any particular identity, you become free to engage with life from an entirely different foundation. You can take on roles, develop skills, form relationships, and pursue goals without mistaking any of these activities for your fundamental identity. You can experience the full range of human emotions without being overwhelmed by them, because you know that your core nature remains untouched by whatever temporary states arise in consciousness. The real proof of successful calcination isn't found in what gets destroyed. It's found in what becomes possible afterward. When you build a personality structure on the foundation of authentic being rather than conditioned patterns, everything changes. The relationships you form, the work you choose, the way you respond to challenges and opportunities, all of it becomes an expression of something real rather than a defense against something feared. This is where the alchemical process moves beyond destruction into active creation. You can now choose how to respond to any situation based on what actually serves the highest good, rather than what protects your ego. You can form relationships based on genuine connection, rather than mutual validation of each other's defense mechanisms. You can pursue work and creative projects that express your authentic nature rather than compensating for some imagined inadequacy. The ancient Hermeticists taught that this reconstructed personality, built on the foundation of purified consciousness, was qualitatively different from anything that came before. They called it the solar body, a stable structure of consciousness that could engage fully with the world while remaining rooted in the unchanging ground of pure awareness. This isn't some abstract spiritual achievement. This is a practical transformation that affects every aspect of daily life, from how you handle conflict, to how you make decisions, to how you relate to success and failure. So how do you actually work with calcination when it shows up in your life? Because here's what the ancient texts make clear. This isn't something you necessarily choose. It's something that chooses you when consciousness is ready to expand beyond its current limitations. The signs are usually unmistakable. You might find yourself questioning everything you once held sacred. Old sources of meaning and identity start feeling hollow or even ridiculous. Relationships that once felt essential become unbearable. Career paths that once excited you now seem pointless. This isn't depression, though it might look similar from the outside. This is consciousness outgrowing its current container. The key is learning to distinguish between authentic calcination and mere psychological disturbance. True, calcination has a quality of inevitability about it, a sense that something larger is at work, burning away what's no longer needed. There's often a strange sense of rightness, even in the midst of the discomfort, as if some deeper part of you recognizes that this destruction is necessary for your development. When you recognize calcination beginning in your life, the most important thing is not to interfere with the process. Don't try to rebuild the old structures while they're being burned down. Don't try to make the fire more comfortable. It needs to be hot enough to do its work. Your job is simply to stay present with what's happening, to observe the process without trying to control it, and to trust that what's being destroyed was never serving your highest development anyway. Most importantly, understand that calcination is cyclical. The fire of purification must be rekindled again and again throughout authentic development. Each time you reach a new level of integration, new patterns of false identification tend to form around your expanded sense of self. Each stage of growth brings new opportunities for the ego to reconstitute itself in more sophisticated forms. The mature practitioner learns to welcome calcination as a sign that consciousness is ready to expand into new possibilities, becoming so identified with the fire itself that burning away illusion becomes as natural as breathing.